some people that we spoke to, and this is where some of the crew was just like, you gotta be kidding me, were like the so-called Bitcoin maximalists. Kyle was the only one? He was one of the only interviews. There may have been two that I did where I just kind of came undone in like the first 25-30% of the interview. Bitboy is a great one to start, right? Like, I thought that, people got a little heated about having him on there, but in my mind, he was such an obvious clown.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Midcurve. Today we are talking to Shern Sharma, the director of the Bloomberg feature film Ruin. If you haven't seen it yet, I will play the trailer for you now so you have a bit of color, but if you have seen it, go ahead and skip forward a few minutes to get to the actual interview. This conversation was a bit outside of the crypto podcast norm, but that's kind of what we're going for. It was a ton of fun for me, though, as an aspiring cinephile, so I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
I think this will probably go down in history as one of, if not the largest financial crimes ever.
I cannot imagine a scenario where $8 billion just disappears.
They use QuickBooks, a multi-billion-dollar company using QuickBooks.
Sam Bankman-Fried has been arrested in the Bahamas.
Bankman-Fried has pled not guilty to multiple fraud charges.
Very few people want to go on the record saying anything bad about Sam or about FTX. Sam was just too important in the crypto community.
He was negotiating directly with politicians, with world leaders.
When someone says, I'm going to give $1 billion in the next 2 years, like that catches everybody's attention.
He was not only one of the richest people in the world, he was a young rich person.
He was like a really interesting kind of new sort of philanthropist. And so effective altruism becomes this like essentially a community of people that mostly develops online, and it's about giving as much money as possible in the most effective way.
I got involved in the EA community in college, and it's been a really big part of how I've decided what to do with my life.
As time went on, their ideas got like weirder and weirder.
They started worrying about apocalypses.
Like killer robots.
We need to stop AI from killing us. And that's the kind of effective altruism that Sam Bankman-Fried believes.
Like if you don't save the world because you were too worried about what the Securities and Exchange Commission might think, like maybe that makes you a bad person.
I don't think he even had almost a conception at some point that it was wrong or right. I think he just had the mentality that he has to win.
It was almost like trying to explain like business ethics 101 to a baby.
Sam has basically become a villain in everyone's minds.
This committee will not stop until we uncover the full truth behind the collapse of FTX.
Sue, Mark.
Are you in? I'm in.
I'm in.
I'm in.
I'm in.
We're in.
Will this be the last of its kind? No. This is the nature of capitalism. Get over it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our third podcast, I think it is, of Midcurve. We are here with Shern. As you can probably tell, we're missing my beautiful co-host, but it's just me today. Hopefully that's all right. But we are here with Shern Sharma. Did I say that? Did I say that name right?
Oh, yeah, you got it.
Yeah, I got it. Nice. The director of a little documentary called Ruin about FTX. And I think I'm actually going to play the trailer right before this. So you guys will, if you haven't seen it, you will know at least what it is about. But I'm sure that everyone watching this podcast will have a intimate familiarity with this story because we've all been touched by it in some way, I'm sure. But I like to start us off. Can you maybe give us your background in filmmaking? And just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, yeah, for sure. My background in filmmaking before this film was mainly in commercials. I was doing commercials for some years. And I guess around 2017 or so, I started doing these like, I guess, branded content was like kind of a thing. And companies wanted these like quasi short films that were supposed to have entertainment merits on their own that, people would watch and not know that they were being advertised to. And then, there'd be like a sneaky logo at the end or something like that. And I guess like in making those, you develop a certain grammar and vernacular. And I don't know, like I'm not like I guess I am. I've made a documentary now, but I'm not a doc guy. Like I never thought of that. So, but in the process of making these branded content, there was a language that started to develop through that. So it sort of like led nicely to, doing something longer form eventually.
Yeah.
In that
Yeah,
world.
that is interesting because I went through a lot of your work, and it is it's beautiful, but they do feel like, I mean, they're not docs, but they feel like mini docs, right?
Yeah.
Just in like kind of a different form. And I was going to ask you, and this is kind of off topic, but you did one on an artist in Rome. And have you ever seen the film The Great Beauty?
Yeah, of course. You talking about the
Okay.
shot where he's laying on the fountain?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So like, well,
That's what that was, of course.
yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
We
So
had
it's like,
access to that place, and like, how could you not recreate that?
yeah, it's one of my favorite films. And as I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, he's definitely seen this movie. It looks exactly like it, and it's beautiful. That was really cool. That's kind of off topic, but I just wanted to
No, that's great.
ask you about it.
I don't think anybody's ever asked me about that film, so that's fun.
Yeah.
That was a good one to make. Yeah.
It was beautiful. Like it looked awesome. So actually, that leads to my next question. Do you actually, when you started doing all this, were you shooting and editing? Do you still shoot? Do you still edit? Because I know for Ruin, you were the director, right? And a mutual friend of ours was the DP. But so yeah, like, how did you start? And do you still do everything, or is it just directing?
No, I don't. Fortunately, before I was like, making my living as a director, I was doing some editing. I did a compositing on occasion. I had a strong photography background, so like I've shot plenty of things. I mean, it's like beg, borrow, steal until you
make it.
Yeah, so like there isn't a department that I haven't touched at some point, at some level of profession. These days, no. I mean, I'm just directing and like, and that's it. I mean, I shot some of the Bolex for Ruin simply because Jordan and I were on opposite sides of the country, and there was a lot to shoot. So it was like, that 16 millimeter became quite a big part as we continued. But no, thankfully, I can just focus on leading the band and letting everybody do their thing these days.
That's nice.
Yeah,
it's helpful, right?
It's great. And I would say, like, also just having some background in the various disciplines is helpful. Like, if I'm speaking to an editor or a composer, well, actually, I don't have any background in composer other than it's just like I like music. But speaking to an editor or a DP or a gaffer and having some passing knowledge of their trade makes it a little bit more productive. I'm not asking for something ridiculous or, I think it's like a more fruitful collaboration.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so let's dive into this film and talk about what we're here to talk about. You were the director of Ruin. Could you give us a brief? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have actually seen this film at this point. The people watching this podcast anyway. But could you give us a brief overview of the film and maybe some of the themes that you were exploring?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess to peel it back from the beginning, we really wanted to make a film that like was not for like the heads, I think the people who are watching this now, and I think the crypto community in general, it wasn't necessarily for them. I think that, I mean, my experience in speaking to the people in that community is like they're very knowledgeable. They knew the story back to front already, and there wasn't like a lot of insight that I could provide for a number of reasons. Like, it's not the most open community, and rightly so. Like, I think the way they are portrayed, or you could say tech in general in media, is like not the kindest. And I think there's not much upside when someone comes to you and is like, hey, do you want to talk about whatever for no money to be immortalized in film forever? It's like, you'd really have to think about like, what is there anything in me for that? So I think like doing this with Bloomberg was wonderful because they have great access, and a lot of the reporters have decent relationships with a lot of the people we spoke to. But I wanted to I was very like quickly disabused of any notion that I would be able to like get in there and, you know, speak to these people who haven't been spoken to yet. And, you know, like that just wasn't going to happen. But I felt like it was still like a wild story that could have some good value for people who are like, I knew what Bitcoin was, or maybe they saw some of the FTX ads, you know, they had some idea that like there's platforms where people are doing this thing. And it seemed like a cool thing because I couldn't get to the depth that I wanted to like focus on something I was interested in, which was like the greater zeitgeist being involved in this, like everybody stuck at home in 2020. Effective altruism, though I think that was also it was a little more superficial than I would have preferred. But again, getting access there was very difficult. So something that like an average person who has some sense could watch this and like get a good idea of what the story was as I understood it, and as I guess everyone on the team understood it, and then could have like some idea of like how the crypto industry was working or responding during the time that led up to it, and then so it was like more of a primer. That was the intention, you know.
Yeah. Okay, so before you did this, were you interested in crypto? Were you into it? Were you following it as it was unfolding? And like, what was your perception of crypto before you took on this job?
I feel like everybody has, if you live in like New York or in LA or a major city, everyone has this story where they're like, yeah, you know, my friend was like telling me I should buy Bitcoin in 2011. Like I remember eating some like shitty noodle bar in Bushwick in 2011, and I had two friends who were like making fun of people who were accruing Bitcoin at this point. They're like, what can you do with it? And I had not heard of it at all. And I was like, well, what, you know, you guys, this sounds like a jokey thing. And they're like, well, actually it has potential. And it's like, they were mocking it, but also like strangely reverent. Right. Yeah. And I wouldn't have even known, I guess I would have had something on Mt. Gox at that point. So I probably wouldn't have anything anyway, but like, I was broke and totally risk averse, even for nothing, you know, like, I don't remember what the price was at that point, but like I could have bought $1 billion worth for $1 or something. But anyway, so I just like kind of filed that away. And then over the years it would come up again. And then the like, I guess it was 2017, 2018, the like ICO summer. I can't remember exactly when that was. It was around then. I was like going to barbecues and parties, and like people were talking about, you know, buying this or that. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. Like this is back on the menu again. And then of course in 2020, I'm at home like everyone else. I have nothing to do, getting those stimulus checks. And it's like, you know, I mean, it's fucked up, but like that is it. And so many people I knew where it's like any risk aversion you had up until that point was mitigated by having some money where you're like, well, I can't spend on anything at this point. And Robinhood was, you know, going crazy. GameStop was going crazy. And I got Binance US, which is like not, you know, it's not like, I live in Europe now, and you can get actual Binance, and I think the offerings are much, you know, but even like then, I mean, I remember like I tried to get a Kraken account, and it's like I had to send money to some address in San Francisco. It was a wire. It was just like everything was complicated. And I, you know, but in the end, like ended up buying some ETH, bought some Bitcoin, bought like a bag of shit coins that I, you know, whatever. I shouldn't say that because some of these projects are still going and they're fine, but like,
oh no, they're shit coins.
Yeah. Okay. And I didn't really, I'm not like a true believer or something. Like I wasn't buying it because I was like, all right, this is where it's going, and this is very important. It was more just like, hey,
yeah, you weren't into the ideology. You weren't like red pill,
really
like, okay, we're gonna overthrow the government.
Tell you, like, I read the Satoshi paper or something like that. It's just not true.
Yeah,
I just wanted to make some money.
Honestly, like that, you're like, you know, 90%, right? You're like the 80% of people, right? That are interested in crypto.
And having spoken to people who are like way all in, it's like, I'm not that.
You're not that, exactly. And
I respect those people. I'm just not that.
Exactly.
So yeah, like I was buying some stuff, and then like, you know, our mutual friend, he and I would work on shoots, and we'd compare notes, and you know, and I got out. So anyway, so you start buying stuff, and you start learning a little bit, and you're reading forums, and I sold everything right before like the first dip. I want to say that was at the end of 2021. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, it was something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was right beginning of 2022, I think.
It was something like that, and there was no real reason for it. I just felt it just started to feel a little bit like it was becoming too oh, you know what? I remember what it was. It was everybody was talking about Elon going on SNL, and it was like getting a stock tip from your guy who cuts your hair or something. It's like, oh,
the Uber driver.
People were legit saying like, I'm gonna buy all this Dogecoin as soon as he goes on SNL. It's gonna pump like crazy, and then I'm gonna sell it after. And it's like, that's a shitty plan. That's not obviously. If it was that easy, everybody, you know. And of course, as soon as the show began, everything just, you know, he didn't even say his line. It was just like, so I right before that, I was like, no, I'm done. But it was still like interesting for me. And around what was it? Right around the time FTX collapsed, it was like what, late 2022. I'm in Oxford in November, and I'm staying with a friend of mine who is a buddy of mine from Hong Kong. I used to live in Hong Kong, and he was like an art director and a struggling game designer. And some friends of his in Hong Kong were like, hey, we're doing this NFT project. And he's like, I don't know anything about that. And they're like, that's cool. Just do the art for us. And his project went really well. And like,
do you know which one it was?
Yeah, it was called, Cosmic Dream Lounge is the new one. Neon. Hang on a second. Let me come back to that. It would be nice to plug his project. I'm totally blank. Totally blanking right now.
Right.
Neon Death Pact? No, that's the name of his game. Fuck. I'll get it.
Okay.
So that's like not. Oh, Voxodeus. I'm sorry. Voxodeus is what it was called.
Okay. And it was on. Was it on ETH?
It was on. Was it on ETH? Yes, it was on ETH. It was on ETH.
Okay.
So that project went really well. Anyway, I'm staying with him. Haven't seen this guy in a while. We're hanging out, and right around this time, some people that were involved had some money on FTX, and as this thing is imploding, he's having a lot of calls, and it's sounding terrible, and I don't really understand. So he's giving me like, this is why this is important. This is what's happening, you know, and like giving me the analysis like minute by minute, and you know, like, oh, CZ just tweeted he's going to buy FTX. Maybe we'll be okay. This kind of thing, and I was really getting into it because it was like watching some, you know, pay-per-view main event or something. It was crazy, and so while that's happening, I get this call from a producer friend of mine who I had done a commercial with over the summer, and he's like, we've got this. He's like, I've been asked by Bloomberg to help produce a film that they want to make about this. They didn't really have, like, they weren't geared up to make a feature film, right? Like, I think a lot of the stuff they were making was, you know, kind of like Vice style, like hosts, you know, people, and their director of content, I guess, this guy, Kyle Kramer, really smart guy. He came from Forbes, and like he just had like a very sharp sense of like, what this is like a thing to land on, and we should be following this. But it happened so quickly, he wanted to really like gear up for it. And he's like, there are lots of companies who are announcing FTX films and whatever, and we had to move really quickly. But he didn't, you know, they didn't really have the in-house team for this sort of thing. So Stuart, our producer, got hired to produce it, and he's like, "Who's your director?" And he's like, Kyle's like, "Oh, we're going to try and do it in-house because we don't have time to go through that whole process." And he's like, "Well, I know a guy who I think would be quite good for this. You should talk." And long story short, I I was primed on the story because I had been soaking in it for a couple weeks, and I just found myself being hired to direct this project. And yeah, that's how it came to pass.
That's awesome. So can you actually like walk me through the actual process of making the film? Like just walk through like, because I know from speaking with Jordan, it was like you guys were in like a bunch of countries over, many months. So can you walk through like how you actually like the production process?
Yeah, sure. So I had to write a bunch of treatments and story outlines because it's like they wanted to go quickly, right? I mean, we made this whole thing from like me getting hired to delivering it, I think in like 11 months, which is insane for a feature film. And so I had to like get my head around the story, which involved watching lots of videos, speaking to lots of journalists, and speaking to various crypto people that my friends could introduce me to, so that I had some sense of like, okay, this happened, then this happened, and then this happened, and this led to this, and like, and then I have to say, like, the other thing is, it's funny, I've read a good number of the YouTube comments. I have a group chat with some of the other people who made the film. We just grabbed the savage ones because they're hilarious. And a lot of people are like, why didn't you talk about corrupt Gary Gensler? Or why didn't you talk about, and it's like, come on, like, you can't just fucking say stuff like that when you're working for a major media outlet. It's like, this stuff has to be verified or you can't do it. And I was coming across phenomenal bits of interesting story, but like, we get sued. Like, you can't put that stuff in unless it's like vetted and confirmed. So my process of writing, and I say that I'm not a documentary person because I don't really care about that stuff. When you're doing narrative, you just want to tell a great story. So I was pulling in all that stuff initially, like every rumor and what may or may not be conspiracy or not, I was putting it into the outline. Like, this is wild. We got to pursue this. And they're like, just putting lines through stuff. Like, we can't say these kinds of things. If this comes out later, fine. But for now, this is unproven. These are allegations. This is lawsuit. And I'm like, all right, but it's fine. So we whittle it down to like, here's an outline that works. And then it's like, all right, well, how do I add value to this? And what am I interested in? Because like, I don't want to just like tell a XYZ story.
Yeah.
And so the parts that were like fascinating to me, like I find Sam to be a really interesting character. I first had come across him listening to a Sam Harris podcast on effective altruism. And I thought, well, this guy is interesting. And I'd known about effective altruism for some years. And, I'd even given money to the so-called bed nets. And that was interesting to me. The sort of philosophical and ideological upbringing of this guy, who's like a brilliant guy with like very strange priors about how to operate in the world, and like a very odd sense of morality, but like an interesting character. And the template up until that point, I felt like was like Madoff. Like, I don't know if you watched that film, but it's like, it's just 90 minutes of someone telling you how bad someone is, right? And that was another fun comment on YouTube, is people are like, they let him off too easy. And it's like, would you want to watch a film where someone is just browbeating you for, it's like, yeah, obviously he's going to prison and he's 7 counts of fraud. It's like, we get that part. He's bad, he's bad. He did bad things, but what brings someone to that place is very interesting to me. So I knew EA was going to play some part, his background. And then also, it was harder for me to stick this part, but like, I felt somehow complicit in like in a very nebulous way, but like how all of us were playing in this casino, which it essentially was for many people, right? Like for this 80% of people that I think I'm a part of, we're just like buying, pump and dump coins, and like we're not in there to like change the world. It's like, I want to make some bucks, and this seems like it'll work, and we're giving these people our money, and we're like part of this weird zeitgeist, which is like, maybe I've lost my chance to, I missed out on like buying a house in Manhattan in the 80s or something, or whatever it is. Like, this is my moonshot opportunity and I got to go all in. And I don't know.
Sorry,
Yeah.
like what you said there is probably one of the most true, the truest things said on a crypto podcast, maybe ever. I don't know. I don't usually hear people just like say the quiet part out loud, but yeah, I think that you're completely right in that. I guess some of us like have to take personal responsibility for our role in this whole thing, and yeah, we were complicit because. You're right. Like 80-90% of us are just here to make money. We're not here to change the world. And you overlook things when things are going well, you tend to overlook things. Like everyone knew that Alameda was closely tied with FTX, right? And everyone knew that there was some like weird relationship going on there that probably shouldn't happen. And, definitely wouldn't happen in or shouldn't happen in traditional finance. But there was definitely like this weird closeness, and everyone overlooked it because, numbers were going up, right? So it's all okay until it's not.
That's
So,
it.
Yeah,
it's just like God, I've been out of this now for a while. I'm drawing a blank. What was Alex? The big crypto bank. They were offering 10% returns that collapsed right before Voyager.
SVB?
No. Much bigger. Mashinsky's waking up in the morning thinking about it.
Celsius.
It's like
I lost money on Celsius too, by the way.
A lot of people did, and it's like, the thing is, there's no 10% returns that anybody can legitimately offer you, right? It's like there's always a little something, but when it's coming back, you're like, hey, this is great. It's all good.
Yeah.
Like I met several people who lost like the house. They lost their house on Celsius. People who are like older as well, and it's sad. But at the same time, like a lot of these people were using, a lot of these institutions, I should say, were using the same vernacular as like the banking system is. And you think of a bank, you're like, well, I put my money in there and I don't think about it. I'm going to get it. You don't think about FDIC. You just do it. And, we were doing kind of a similar thing where it's like, yeah, it'll be fine. Like people leaving money on it. I was leaving money on the exchange. Like, I thought, well, hey, Binance is pretty robust, but like, that's not what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And and guys I knew who definitely know better were doing the same thing because they were like, whatever, I'm making a lot of high frequency trades and I don't want to get dinged every time for gas fees or whatever, for moving it from my wallet. So it's like, so that was interesting to me. Like, what role do we play in creating a guy that goes from 0 to 32 billion in 2 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the final thing that was fascinating to me was just how that feels, right? Like there's a handful of people in human history that I think will be able to relate to that. And I can't imagine earning millions of dollars is pretty deranging. Like it changes your experience of the world dramatically.
Yeah, and your perception of reality and all that.
1 billion, it's like it's hard for people to even understand what that means. And 32 billion, and in 2 years, and you're this like nebbish, overweight, vegan, and all of a sudden you're sitting on stages with world leaders, and people are not challenging you at all, and you're saying like that's just. I don't think there's a human on earth that can go through an experience like that and not get completely turned around. So
yeah.
Long answer, but those are the areas that I thought, okay, I can add some value here and explore these things because the story is, more or less out,
Yeah, for sure. So let's dig into that a little bit because, okay, so we've talked about Sam. Did you actually speak with Sam?
Yeah, and it's funny, like I don't know how much I'm supposed to say or not supposed to say. We had a off the record conversation. I think I'm allowed to say that. Maybe I can't say what the conversation was about, but like, we spoke for quite some time once.
Oh. Okay, so we won't dive into that just in case.
Yeah.
But let's talk about some of the other characters that you interviewed and dive into that a little bit, because some of these people are, probably some of the most interesting people that I've ever like come across. Some of them I've met, some of them I haven't. But I've been around for a long time, so I've watched a lot of their rise and fall on social media. So yeah, let's dig into that. You interviewed Bitboy, Sue, Kyle, Justin Sun, most of the big names in crypto. And like when this was all happening, You know, I had a lot of friends who would say like, why would they give these grifters a platform to even speak, right? So what would you say? What was your reason for bringing these types of people on?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I can tell you about all of them. Bitboy is a great one to start, right? Like, I thought that, you know, people got a little heated about having him on there, but in my mind, he was such an obvious clown, you know, like, and the thing I think people forget is like, if you're in this world, you see Bitboy, you're like, I hate that guy. He's XYZ. If you're not in this world, you see this guy who's like wearing this just tacky Givenchy shirt with his glasses and his guards behind him. And then he's got his whole crew there who are just like, and like some of his crew are legitimately nice people. And I don't want to savage them, but it's like, it's a circus and it's crazy. And you see it. And anyone who's not in this world, you don't look at that and go, these are the guys I need to be paying attention to. And I felt like it was important to include some of the spectacle because they were camped out essentially in front of that courthouse in the Bahamas every day, grandstanding. These weird politicians would come and want to make sure they were seen on camera talking to them. And it just was like, you know, there was something to me that was like darkly ironic about this guy talking about who's here for the victims, when it's like anybody who's like curious about him, who's watching the film and is like, I would like to know more about this authority on crypto. You just put his name in one time in Google and you're like, oh. So I didn't want to, I'm not really of the school of thought where people are like, I have to hide certain people, otherwise it'll corrupt the thinking. It's like, do your own research, come to your own conclusions. I didn't want to feed anybody anything. I wanted to talk to people because I was interested in them, not to give them a platform. That's not my thinking at all. So why did I talk to like Sue and Kyle? Well, they were in the middle of this. I mean, 3AC going down was like a big part, as far as I understood it at the time, of all of these banks recalling loans. So when I gave my outline to the journalists, they're like, all right, well, to get this story beat, you might want to talk to these people. To get this story beat, you might want to talk to these people. And, you know, you got to remember, like, I'm coming from just like, I have interest in this philosophically, but I don't know who the players are yet. So I would talk to anybody, you know, and if somebody said something that was like, I don't know, insightful or part of the story, like, I'm not going to cut it just because I don't like them or something, you know, that's,
of course,
that didn't feel right to me. But we also did subtle things, like, or I thought they were subtle. I don't know, maybe they weren't so subtle. But like, you know, when we're talking to Sue, you know, nobody said anything about the fact that he looks like he's on Crime Watch. I mean, it's an empty
just
room.
a dark room. Yeah.
You know, it's like, is he on the run? We're not sure. He's wanted by authorities. Like, we knew that going into it. I mean, obviously he got arrested in Singapore. So it's like, and you know, when we talked to Kyle in the middle of the desert, you know, create the scenes there, it's like, I wanted it to feel some aspect of like how these guys are actually living. I mean, Dubai is a crazy place in general, and these guys are legitimately hiding out there, felt like. So having scenes that were some way reflective of that felt to me not necessarily legitimizing, but more a reflection of what this actual life looks like. I mean, when we talk to Alex Svanovic, for instance, I mean, he's in his office. Like, this is, you know, he's not hanging out outside of the helicopter. It's like, this is you know, I don't know what people's opinions are on him. He seemed like a nice guy, and we talked to him in his office, and that was it. You know, so that was how I ended up with Feel.
What was your personal impression? Like, let's go into Sue and Kyle for a little bit, because I thought they're super interesting characters, no matter what you think of them. So let's dive into that. What was your impression of Sue and Kyle after speaking with them? And like, I got the story from Jordan when he was filming. You know, I got his opinion of like what was happening when you guys were in Dubai. But yeah, I want to get your thoughts.
Well, Kyle. I'll start with Kyle. Kyle was the only one? He was one of the only interviews. There may have been two that I did where I just kind of came undone in like the first 25, 30% of the interview. And when I say I'm done, like I like to just have conversations. I don't like, I have a list of things that I want to know, and there's some general shape to the interview, so to speak, but I'm legitimately curious. I have a lot of questions, and sometimes they go in places that I just didn't anticipate. Now, this guy he was later described to me as like a traditional like hedge fund guy.
Yeah.
And he was using acronyms. I definitely did not know at that point. And he had a way of speaking that I found it really difficult to come to the next, like if we were just having a drink in a bar, I don't know if I'd be able to respond. I'd probably just nod and be like, I don't know what this guy's deal is. It's too esoteric of a topic for me, and I think I'm just going to find someone else to talk to. You can't do that when you're shooting an interview with someone. It's like, and it wasn't about me not being prepared, although you could say that because I'm a novice in this world. It was thick, and his attitude was interesting to me because I asked him one question that he batted away with such confidence, and like it was so dismissive that to me it was breathtaking. I said something like, he had I'll put it together as I go, but it's like he knew where the banks that were lending him money were getting their money from. And it's like these banks are getting consumer funds for their specious products. They're giving it to 3AC to invest, and 3AC is doing whatever they want with it. And I think I said something like, how did you feel about knowing where the money was coming from? And he's just like, pass. And as he's doing that, I'm like, yeah, I get it. I would probably do the same thing. Cause he's like, I'm not thinking about that. I'm making money. That wasn't illegal. It was morally suspect, but not necessarily illegal. Yeah. And that was something I like butted up against quite often, which was like, is it wrong in some domain of morality? Yes. Is it illegal? Unclear. So Kyle was like, I gotta say, like, he was up for it. I said, dude, we'll talk to you in the desert. He came 4 hours or whatever it took us to get out there. We did this whole thing out there with him, and Sue is a more interesting guy. And both these guys are obviously highly intelligent people who have a penchant and a power with numbers. They're not fools. They just take a lot of huge risks. And Sue had a different kind of energy. He was the only one who he was really into this idea of, like, if I have to guess people's motivation for why they took these interviews, because again, there's no upside.
Yeah.
He was really pitching this idea of like, I'm going to Bali, I'm focusing on what's important. And it's like, okay, fine. But that's not why we're here, Yeah. And, he never stumbled. He was very fluent. Anything I asked him. And again, I'm not like trying to get gotcha questions, right? Because I don't know. That didn't feel like my job. I just wanted to know. I wanted to present people in the context that they were in. And if he seemed dodgy, that's on him. It's not like I'm trying to get him with some sucker punch question. But I did ask him a few more aggressive questions because just by nature of them, they were aggressive. And he never really missed a beat. He had an answer for everything. And but he had a very he was the greyest character I met. Where it was.
What do you mean by that?
Well, an example of something. So we shot Polaroids of everyone that we talked to. And the reason for all of that was, I mentioned previously this idea of someone going from 0 to 32 billion over this 2 years. I wanted it to kind of feel like strangely voyeuristic, almost like we were watching someone's private diary of memories throughout this thing. There was that, and there was also this idea that like crypto is math, and what do you shoot? There's nothing to shoot. It's like terminals. Someone's idea of an exchange is exciting and dynamic, and in reality, it's like some laptops and a server. It's like it sucks. So we wanted to come up with metaphors and things that would give it some sort of form. And the analog was the attempt to create something that was tactile from something that is digital. Anyway, shot his, and I say Polaroids because when was the last time somebody took a Polaroid of you? And these were legit Polaroid, like dead stock. You know, we bought a land camera and like we had a few different, and everyone I'd taken a photo of up until that point was like, oh, that's so cool. And like, can I have a copy? I was like, well, it doesn't really work that way, but you can take a photo of it. And he, you know, he got his photo and wasn't that interested. And then, you know, we shot a bunch of stuff with him. And when we finished for the day, he just disappeared. I mean, we were, the last shot we took of him is the one where he's walking down the ramp into the subway, and he just bounced. And a PA
he just got on the subway and just left.
Yeah, it wasn't like he was just like, okay, you guys done? Yep, great. Okay, I'm out. And he just left. And PA had to run after him, get him signed a release form. And I realized an hour later, once we got to the hotel, I didn't get the Polaroid back from him. And so I text him and I'm like, dude, I got to get that Polaroid off you. And he's like, I put it in the trash. I'll have to find it or something like that. I was like, okay, like strangely unsentimental, you know? Anyway, we get it back. And if you watch the film, you'll notice his is like kind of smudged, and it's because his Polaroid was in the garbage. And he, to his word, he fished it out and got it back to us, and we used it for the film. But there was something about that gesture that I thought, I mean, I'm very sentimental and nostalgic, and I could never imagine throwing out a Polaroid from a day I was interviewed for a significant film. So like uncaringly, it was very strange. And that was to me very instructive of where his
it's you saying that definitely shows that you're like not of this world that we're in over here. Because I think a lot of people that work here and work with numbers are, you know, very logical. And you probably saw that, you know, as you were talking with people throughout the film. It's like things are very binary, right? Very black and white. But yeah, I think the other interesting thing you talked about is like this idea of, you know, morality versus, you know, something being illegal or not, and this like gray area. And I felt like the film like kind of like rode that line a little bit, or like tried to tell that story a little bit. So did you find like that as a theme? Did they all have that mindset, or were there certain people that were definitely like, no, this is wrong, we're not going to do that?
I don't think like, I'm trying to think of like what the grid is, where it's like, it's always like the first time I think I saw this was like Game of Thrones characters, where it's like this person is like morally good and you know, I think it's just morally good, and then like on the other end you have like chaotic bad or something, and you've got like neutral. Anyway, I didn't talk to anybody who was in that upper right quadrant.
Morally good,
like just you know, law abiding, observant, like, because I think in any business, like success in these arenas does not select for someone who's
morally good,
just doing this thing. And I think it has more to do with risk than it does with like morality, but it's like, you have to be able to shrug a few things off. Right.
Yeah.
And I that goes for me too. It's like, you don't get into doing film because, you know, you want to do the right thing. It's like, you got to break some rules if you even want to have a career. So I think it definitely selects for people who are willing to, you know, push a few things and maybe apologize rather than ask for permission, as they say. Some are like maybe a little looser than others, but you know, there was definitely like a kind of a piratey, you know, vibe, I would say, that was
Yeah, fortunately, I was warned about Sue very early on because I have friends who work in traditional finance in Hong Kong, and they had crossed paths with him before. And he was, when he, you know, first struck out on his own with Kyle, they were doing some things that were like morally, you know, gray, even in the traditional world, that, you know, some market makers weren't too happy with. So so even early on, when everyone was looking at Sue as some sort of, you know, deity, philosophical guru on Twitter, talking about the super cycle and all that. People were warning me and others like, hey man, this guy's just a grifter. Like, do not listen to him. So anyway, that was like my first experience with Sue, and then it was interesting to watch him like pump these coins and stuff, and then completely fall from grace. And now he's so crazy, and like you kind of mentioned, he's so resilient, and maybe such a, I don't know, my opinion, a sociopath, that it's like even going to prison, he spins it as some like meditative retreat that everyone should try. And I just find that so interesting that you can I don't know, that you can live your life like that.
Yeah, I mean, who am I to call anybody a sociopath? But like, he definitely skews in that direction. I mean, and that's a common thing. I don't remember what the numbers are exactly, but like a shocking percentage of the general population is sociopathic or psychopathic.
Yeah,
it's like a significant percent. He definitely is built different, When I read that he was arrested, I don't know. I could imagine some of the people I spoke to being arrested and being much more brittle.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
When I read him, I kind of just felt like he doesn't seem like, I think it'll be fine or something.
That's so funny. So who do you think? I'm a random question, but who do you think would have broke in prison? Bitboy.
For sure.
Yeah. He's way too soft to go to prison.
And like, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you saw
bodyguards. He had bodyguards in the Bahamas. It's like, come on, bro.
Did you see him standing outside trying to get the ETF approved in DC? Did you see that? Any of that footage? Okay, you've been out of it. That's probably good for you. You should. Yeah, it's you don't need to deal with all this drama.
The most insane stuff. We have a group chat, and like that, that's me, the editing team. It chirps every couple of weeks. There'll be some article, and it's like, you guys have to read this. This is, like Larry David, for instance, finally addressing his endorsement. Cool, amazing.
Yeah. Larry David. The most right person to ever be on a crypto. Just like, nah, I'm good.
Yeah.
Who is the most interesting, or do you have any like really fascinating stories about people? I know you interviewed Justin. I don't know if you want to talk about him, but he is
sure.
Okay.
And again, like, I don't know. I have no idea. Some of these people are so litigious, and they would squash me like a bug, but what am I going to do? He was an interesting guy because like his interview was not useful at all. He's so media coached. He had a staff of people, keeping on top of him, that it's like, I would ask him questions. He also has a very thick accent, which I think he uses to great effect. We did it in his house, so it's like already we're at a tactical disadvantage, right? Like when I'm invited into someone's, it's not the right vibe. We've got all of our gear there. We're compromised already. It's like, but that was the only way he was willing to do it. It's got to be my place. And, and I would ask him questions, and I would, maybe that was the second time I came a bit unstuck after Kyle. I would have to sit there for a moment. Like, did he actually answer the question I asked him? How many more times can I ask it? And how many permutations of this question? I just don't think I'm going to get anything. He was really intent on hawking something. I don't remember what it was. And, so in the end, like, it just didn't happen. He rolls up in some crazy Lamborghini, of course. And I was trying to do any kind of research that I could before we got there, just so that I didn't have to have my pants pulled down completely. And I found his address, and I found the brochure for his home. Like, I guess when he bought it, it was still available online. And I think he'd been in there for maybe multiple years. I can't remember exactly. And it looked identical to what was on the brochure, down to the furniture. And there was even like a child's room that had all of the original stuff. And what was incredible about that to me was, it's just a turnkey purchase, right? And I experienced that a few times with people. Like, I could never imagine living like that. You know, and this was an expensive house. I mean, this man has a lot of money, expensive car, but they don't seem to enjoy any of it. It's like,
yeah,
I don't even think he was driving his own car. And then the house, it's like for Singapore, this is palatial. But no thought had been put into it, no design, there's no aesthetic. It was just like, yeah, this is fine. I got to get to work. You know?
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just like the transactional binary thing you were referring to earlier, or if it's just like my interests in life are so far removed from this pedestrian nesting thing that I just don't give a shit. And that, I don't know. I thought about that for weeks afterwards. Like, can you imagine just spending, let's say, $20 million on a house, and like, yeah, I'll take it with the crib and the whatever, even though I don't have a family, and I'm just going to live in it for years at a time, and I'm not going to touch anything. It's like, that was wild to me.
That is
for any of that. Who knows?
I think I'm with you on that. Like, it is interesting meeting some of these people, and they're just completely focused on what they're doing, that they don't seem to enjoy, you know, life, I guess, at all.
At least not the way that maybe you or I do. It's just,
that's true. I mean, you know, maybe working is, you know, they find fulfillment in just being on a computer all day, trading numbers or yelling at people that they are God in Justin's case. But I'm curious, like, so from your perspective, from the outside, and then meeting all these people that we deal with every day, and I think that, you know, the people that have been working in crypto for a long time, you know, we're kind of numb to these characters. But like you and the crew coming from the outside and then like entering this world, what was your overall impressions and opinions of these people? And like, what was the takeaway? Because, like, for example, I heard Jordan say, you know, like some of the crew was just like, after they interviewed some of these people, they were like, I don't want anything to do with crypto after this. Was that you as well? Or
no? I mean, I have a lot of obscure hobbies and interests, and there was some part of this that felt like that. I don't know. I appreciate enthusiasts of any stripe, right? And like, maybe that sounds a little simple because we're talking about a hobby that is deeply financial, and, you know, but I guess the jargon and like the excitement and the what often felt impenetrable access to it felt like a club, or like a, you know, this little interest group, right? Like, some of the comments and feedback I got on the film were clearly from people who are in this world deeply. I don't know where exactly, deeply or like periphery, but like, this is their thing and this is their identity. And, you know, their thing is like, who are these people to come in and deal with our thing? You know, this is like Bloomberg made this, or like, and I get it. I mean, it's like record store vibes, right? I mean, this is a niche microculture, and, you know, anytime someone who's an outsider comes in and touches it, you're hypercritical. It's like, you have no right to, you know, whatever. So there's some element of that, right? Like, which I have no problem with. I have, like I said, I've got stuff that I'm into that is very obscure, and I probably would feel the same way. So there's that. And then there's also this like, but it's so much money, you know, like, not that simple. You're not painting Warhammer characters in your bedroom. It's like, this is crazy. And listen, some people that we spoke to, and this is where some of the crew was just like, you gotta be kidding me. Were like the so-called Bitcoin maximalists who really, I mean, I had plenty of fun conversations, and when we were done, you know, with a beer, where for me, the question was always like, well, what's the end game? Because if this is a currency and this is the future and no one's using it as a currency yet, well, there must be a date where that will become the currency. And what else is happening in the world that led to that? Is this a crash? Has gold lost its value? Is there no more faith in the financial system? Like, I don't know. To me, these are like logical follow-on questions to anyone who's saying this is the future of finance. It's like, okay, well, what happened to the rest? And what does that look like? Because it's dark. It's like, I spoke to a lot of people who were like, are waiting for this moment. And it's like, dude, I it's like the person who harbors like end of zombie apocalypse fantasies. Like, I don't think you want to live in that world, even though you've got a lot of great guns and like a Jeep. But there was some undercurrent that's like, if you're really like a believer in this, like I learned about the central bank CBDCs, right? And like a whole rabbit hole. I stayed up late reading that shit, and then I come down for breakfast the next morning. I'm like, you guys have to read about this, and this is, and and I would speak to a number of people who had some sense of like, this is why we're doing it. So there was that spectrum all the way to like,
Bitboy,
this is a great grift. I'm gonna get rich on this, and you get some sense of a person's character, I think, pretty quickly. I mean, at least I do when I'm talking to them, like somebody who's just up to no good,
Yes. So when I first came into crypto, I was red pilled into like the Bitcoin maximum, the church of the Bitcoin maxi, right? Which is, I mean, it is very much a cult and this hardcore ideology. And I think like fairly quickly, I realized that, I mean, I guess like I still have like, some libertarian like, views and like I have a finance background, so I had studied like money in the past, and yeah, it all seemed to make sense. But then as I went along, it was like, okay, I started to come to terms with exactly what you said, which is, if this does happen, like, what am I really rooting for here? And what kind of suffering is going to take place if this actually comes to fruition, and what's the likelihood of it actually happening? And if you look back through like financial events, like recessions generally don't last that long. And so like, I don't know, long story short, I think I became a little bit more rational about the whole thing and logical. And I think that like I personally segment or compartmentalize things. So Bitcoin has its place, it's like the backup gold type thing. And for all those reasons that the Bitcoin maxis kind of describe, but then also like, I think that there's still an existing financial system that continues to live on, and like, why not use that? And then you have like, shit coins with mimetic powers that you can like play with and gamble with. And like, that also has some, value in this world. So, I mean, I don't know. I think it's interesting to watch the film and see like, all these different people's personalities and like where they're coming from. The way that you told the story was it seemed like you were trying to be really unbiased and just tell the story as it was, and like I kind of appreciated that. Now this like long lead up into this question is a lot of crypto media or content is always focused on the negative. It's always focused on, the crashes, the scams, the rugs. And I think the reason that a lot of people get upset or were upset with this film, and like you saw the negative comments, not everyone was negative, obviously, but you saw some of the negative comments is because like it is still highlighting this, this huge scam, right? And for us who are in it every day, we see that there are positives that come out of crypto, but those stories never get told. So my question to you is, and I know, like I said, I think you were trying to ride this line of being just like completely unbiased and tell the story as it happened. But do you think that this film is going to have an overall negative or positive impact? And on like someone who maybe is just coming into crypto?
Yeah, sure. My main takeaway or like what I would hope people finish this feeling is like, this isn't going anywhere. It's not a thing that has a positive or a negative valence, right? There's like total shitbags, and then there's people who are altruistic in every industry. And I feel like, let's just do it with banking for a minute. I make a banking documentary about the fall of Lehman Brothers or something, right? And, everybody walks away from 2008 like, these people are awful, blah, 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 blah. But it's like, okay, but your 401ks are tied up in these same products. So much of what you're doing, but you're not thinking about it. You're only thinking about it when some disaster happens, is part of this institution. And my feeling was crypto it's not at that level yet, but it's not going anywhere. So it's like, there is no positive spin necessarily. There is no negative spin. And even if there is, if you're the sort of person who would watch this and be like, I'm done, it's like, okay, but you're also probably the sort of person who's missing out on a lot of things anyway, because maybe you don't even fly in planes because they've crashed a few times.
Mhm.
And if you're somebody who walks away from this and you're like, I'm all in, I don't know your psychology. So this is something that happens. Why focus on specifically the negative story? Well, that's just, it's hard to say, but like that's storytelling in general. It's like, it's like doing a film on micro loans in India. I mean, these are big and it's important, but it's not dramatic. It's not that interesting. And it's like, I think sometimes what happens is, at least, and this is going to sound a little naive and perhaps idealistic, but sometimes it takes something like this to get someone through the door in the first place. Because all the people who watched this film, the people that I made it for, didn't know anything about this beforehand. So at best, without something like this, they would just continue their life without any sense of any of these things, would never pay attention to it again until maybe another thing happened, right? Or there was another pump or another bull run or whatever. But there's a handful of people who would see this, who are like, this is actually kind of fascinating. I would like to know more. And for them, it's like a way in, So I tried to keep it as neutral as I could, because like, I don't want to assign value or the lack of value to anything. Because again, it's not my world and it didn't feel like my place to do that. It's just something that I think is quite fascinating. And in many ways, it feels almost legitimizing to me, because it's like, there's a ton of institutions who wanted to tell this kind of story. And like, let me tell you, there are plenty of forces who would have preferred this to be a 90-minute litany on the evils of crypto. But like, I would have quit. That's so boring. Yeah. And then there's also a sort of person, there was one guy we spoke to, I wish I could tell this story, but he was really litigious, who said something like, he's like, I'll talk to you guys, but I just want to make sure that, what's your perspective? And because I want it to be 50-50. I want it to be, and it's like, anybody who tells you that I gave him 50-50 and he got butthurt immediately. And he wanted something that was a glowing endorsement. And I'm like, buddy, that's not an infomercial. It's like, this has to be a compelling story, A. And B, I'm hoping, like every other piece of media that people pick up, if they're into it and they have some ideas of their own, they're going to find their way to, a different narrative or a different version of it,
Yep.
I can't hit all the bases either. That's the other thing.
No.
And it was my first film. I was really trying. I mean, it's really hard to make a film. And, there are plenty of things that I would have done differently, errors that I made, but like, man, it's hard. It's really, I spent a year thinking about this nonstop. I really fussing and obsessing over stuff that no one probably cares about or even noticed. And I still came up short in many ways, but hopefully the next one will be better.
I thought it was great for what it's worth. I mean, my opinion doesn't,
I'm proud of it. I think it was good.
I'm just a guy, but I'm going to say it was good. And it was obviously, it looked beautiful. It was definitely like one of the more, I guess, aesthetically pleasing documentaries on crypto I've ever, that has ever came out. So yeah, just really, really cool doc. And for anyone listening to this podcast, you should all go watch it. But yeah, I've definitely had a few conversations with people, a lot of insiders in the industry about the doc, and opinions were mixed for all the reasons that you have listed, right? It's
sure.
But then again, it's like, we are this, this very niche cult who's protective. And I think there are a lot of people who are like really trying to do good. And so they're very protective of like what they're doing. And they don't necessarily see it from like just the storytelling side or from the outsider's perspective, right?
I mean, I get that. I met a guy at an event, and I knew that he worked in crypto, and he shook my hand. He's like, "Oh, you're the guy making the doc, trying to take apart my industry." It's like, well, that was a great opener. He's a really good guy, and he's a friend of mine now. But yeah, like I knew that I'm like, if I can have people watch something and like be into it or really dislike it, that's fine with me. It's the people who are just like, I don't, that sucks.
Yeah.
But if you're like, fuck this, all right, at least you felt something. I mean, I tried. I wasn't trying to piss people off, but like, I wasn't trying to make people like super pumped. It was just,
Mm.
we did our best to make something. And I'll just, I have to add one other thing, which I think is always interesting and sort of gets skirted around. Like, so this problem of like what to show was always like, as soon as I signed it, I'm like, all right, I'm directing this film. My next question was like, what do I show? What do I show? Because I don't want to make a talking head thing. So it's like, all right, well, let's try this analog device. This will be kind of interesting. And then I had been getting quite into all things AI for years. I mean, I ever since I read, and I don't know if this is, I guess this is pretty pedestrian, but just like I started reading Nick Bostrom years ago, and like I found it like a fertile ground intellectually, and so anytime there was some development, a new product launched, I would get in on the beta trials because I wanted to see what was going on. And so I had enough background with the programs that we use, like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion and DID and so on, that it actually felt like a good use of it, because we had to generate things that made you feel like you were in this. We had to generate things that made you feel some sense of like emotion or some sense of like currency or like accruing, or there were a lot of complex things to express that just a guy typing on a computer was never going to do. So we took a shot, and we, in like some of the people explaining the things like using DID, the idea was like, let's go full uncanny valley. This is like a strange time in history, and lots of breakthroughs and things you don't understand are happening. Half these products that people are dumping money into, they don't understand. And it felt like a perfect spiritual analog to that, which was to use these products that maybe we don't even understand, but lend a certain texture to the film that, helped it, I think, to express some of what we otherwise had no idea how to express. So also to say, it was thoughtful. We were thinking about this, where it wasn't just some hype beast thing where we're like, oh, it's cool. It wasn't.
No, that was actually a cool element. I really liked it because I use that stuff too to create like different things. And so like when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is cool. It does definitely fit. It feels like it's pulling you into this weird world of I don't know, it's like this mix of like actual reality and like, online reality, right? It's like it's a blending of those two worlds, which
that's
is
exactly right. That's exactly right. Like, and that was to me some piece of Sam. It's like his world that he lives in, his structures, his morality, his way of operating in the world versus like what was actually happening. And there was some interesting tension there, and that went for everybody. Like what I'm doing here versus like what everyone else is seeing here.
Yep. Yes, exactly. Well, I think let's wrap this one up because we're already over an hour. I feel like maybe you and I could go on for a long time on this stuff, but thank you so much for coming on and taking the time, man.
Thanks for having me. I hope that people dig the film, and if you don't dig the film, that's cool too.